Welcome to Draft Deeper on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. Thank you so much for joining us on this lovely Monday morning edition of the podcast. Joining me tonight is Maxwell Baumbach, lead co-host of the Draft Deeper podcast. Steven, unfortunately, can't be with us, but it's for a good reason. Steven's on the road on assignment, seeing a player who I also got to see this past week and someone who we're going to be talking about on the podcast tonight, and Taylor Hendricks. He couldn't make this episode of the show, but nevertheless, Maxwell and I are still going to roll strong, and we have some interesting discussions to get into, to say the least. Right, Maxwell? How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited because there are some real interesting names here, and I don't know. I'm intrigued to see where we come out on them. I'm excited to see what the response to where we come out on these players is. I'm just fired up. Like, I looked through the list of players again this afternoon that we had scheduled to talk about, and it's just one of those episodes where, like, all day I was just kind of thinking about it, stewing about it, and I'm ready to go.
I mean, we're talking about plenty of big names. I had a really great week live scouting. I was in Philadelphia to see Temple and UCF. I was in Philadelphia again on Saturday night to go see UConn and Villanova. So we're going to talk about some bigger names, some potential top 10 picks on my board and possibly on Maxwell's board as well. We'll get some updates, but I did want to start with a few players who Maxwell has written about over the last few weeks, and then is going to have a piece coming out on Tuesday. We got to give some of the other guys some shine. We always start with my stuff. I know I'm the founder of Draft Deeper, but the show can't always be about me to start. We got to mix it up a little bit here and there. And Maxwell actually is affording us the perfect opportunity to mix it up, because I don't want to start with the player that Maxwell wrote about a few weeks ago in Jalen Pickett. I actually want to go to where he's writing this week. I want to talk about Oso Ighodaro, the Marquette forward, 6'9", 205 pounds. Maxwell wanted to do a deep dive. He's actually, if you haven't followed Maxwell on Twitter, first of all, how dare you? At Boundboards is his hash.
Yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing if you're not following Maxwell? But he puts out a poll every single week, or at least he's been starting to, regarding if a fan favorite, which player do you want him to take a stab at and write about for the prospect overview? Oso Ighodaro won the poll last week. I'm
handily,
handily won it. I'm not surprised, though, because as we're going to get into to start, he's been a pretty popular prospect amongst draft Twitter circles. He's a guy who's coming up. He's getting anywhere from like top 40 to top 60 grades on people's boards. He's had plenty of time to shine in the spotlight now, given Marquette's been not only one of the best teams in the Big East, but they've been one of the best teams in the country for months now, really. I mean, they started off as more of the sleeper school, as I wanted to dub them, right? They had a few interesting prospects. Olivier Masson-Prosper, David Joplin is somebody who I like, Cam Jones. They have a number of guys who I think are going to get NBA attention one way or another, but Oso Ighodaro has been the name to pop, and he's an incredibly funky prospect. So Maxwell, you have to start. You're the one who's writing about him. If I start talking about Oso, this podcast may go off the rails pretty quick, and the audience will soon understand why. So tell myself as well as the audience about Oso Ighodaro and why he's been a prospect who's been buzzing in draft circles.
Yeah. So the title of the article is Oso Ighodaro's Beautiful Game, because the way that he plays basketball is beautiful. Like, it is a very aesthetically pleasing game to watch on the basketball court. And I think that is a big part of his buzz, is I think that subtly, and I'm sure I'm guilty of this at times too, like, evaluators can tend to gravitate towards players that have a game that is exciting to watch and fun, because it's easy to be like, I'm doing work, I'm watching a guy who's very fun to watch. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can have your favorites and guys that you enjoy watching. But Oso Ighodaro, for those unfamiliar, he's at Marquette. He is 6'9", listed at 215 pounds. He is ostensibly their center. And he is a fantastic passer. So to start to get into the passing, I'm going to reference this a couple times throughout this podcast. I put together this little database for myself that is basically, it's advanced numbers for prospects from the last 8 years, I believe it is. during their final college season before the NBA draft. So you can kind of stack up. And like what I like it for is for flawed prospects. So if there, for example, is a guard who has a low usage rate and a lower assist rate for a guard, I can sort it out and see, like, okay, well, who are guards like that made it?
Mm-hmm.
So like in that example, it's usually like guys who are nuclear shooters, like a Bryn Forbes or something like that, or it's your defensive menaces. It's your Carusos. It's those type of guys, Anthony Melton. So this is an easy way to be like, okay, well, if this guy's going to make it, what does it have to look like? For Oso, the thing that like he blows out of the water in there is if I sort big men from that time period by assist percentage, the top 20 percentile have an assist rate of 13.5 or above. Oso's assist rate this year is 18.5%. So 18.5% of the assists from Marquette are coming from him when he's on the floor. That's
crazy high for a big man. Ridiculous.
Crazy high. So the next closest would be Xavier Tillman, who had an 18.1. So he would have a higher assist rate than everybody in this database. And it's really impressive too, because he plays with Tyler Kolek, who is like one of the best table setting guards in college basketball. So theoretically, like he should probably have a lower assist percentage. And in Medi settings, he'd have a higher one because they'd be running even more offense through him.
Tyler Kolek, I believe, was all named all Big East, if I'm correct.
And he should be
one of the
like,
guards.
Not a draft guy, but like a phenomenal college player. So the other thing I looked up was high major college players from the last 18 years who had an assist percentage over 18, are 6'9" and above, and had a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. And it is Oso Ighodaro, my guy who just keeps coming up in every article I write. And like, I can't stop thinking about him because he's like fascinating to me as like far as where the league is going. Dean Wade. We're getting Dean Wade talk again. I feel like I text guys like once a week. I text Nathan once a week.
No, I was going to say you and I text once a week about Dean Wade.
Yeah. And then Kyle Anderson is the other one who's not actually 6'9", but he's listed at 6'9". So it just shows like how rare this is. This guy is truly a rare and very skilled passer. There are some other things to like too, like his block rate measures out pretty well using those same metrics. His steal rate measures out pretty well. So if you're looking at like the feel factors as far as like assists, steal rate, like that kind of stuff is good. Then like it kind of starts to get murky. So I'm going to talk about the other like two good things he does, and then we'll get into like why we're kind of scared about Oso and why we're probably I'm going to say I'm a little cooler than the consensus on Oso. And I'm going to say that Nathan is like in Antarctica compared to the consensus.
When we get to me, I will give it to the audience straight. I mean, we're a very positive podcast most of the time. Mm-hmm. We had to start off with the heat every once in a while.
So the other things that he does really well is just like simply rolling to the basket. Like he's a very effective play finisher. He is like he's in the, I want to say top 20 in college basketball and dunks on the year. Don't have that in front of me at the moment. But he finishes a lot of plays really well. He knows how to roll. He knows how to space himself away from the defense and give his point guard some space, but get himself open. He knows how to sneak behind the back line of the defense. So that makes him a very effective finisher. When he can't dunk it, he has very soft touch on his floater and push shot. He's got an excellent floater. He can stop on a dime too. So when he's rolling to the basket hard and then somebody stops in front of him, he's not going to barrel him over and get called for a charge. He's coordinated enough to stop and just pop it up with his little floater. The other thing he does is he does stay in front well. When he switched on to smaller defenders, he can contain guards, force him to take rough driving angles.
He has to stay in front well.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Yeah. We're gonna get to the bad stuff, Nathan. Hold on. We're gonna say the things he does well first. So there is like some interesting switchability. Like he's not going to be a guy that would get mismatch hunted by smaller players.
Sure.
Which is a nice thing for a big man. Do you want me to lead off the concerns, or do you want to go full negative?
No, you can. You can go in depth about the concerns. Right. I'm just going to give my blanket statement before you do that.
Okay.
I mean, Maxwell, for everyone who's listened to Draft Deeper since I began this podcast, you can probably count on one hand the number of times I've engaged in legitimate hyperbole, like me coming out there saying something so brash, so bold that if it's wrong, it could make me look completely dumb within a few years.
Okay.
Not as a college player, but as a prospect, as an NBA a prospect, not even another pro league prospect, an NBA prospect. I think he sucks. I'm just gonna say it. I think he sucks. I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
I'm just coming in hot today.
All right. Okay.
So you said a lot of decent positives for Oso, but I think once you run through the negatives, I think you're going to arrive pretty quickly at a conclusion of, so why are we talking about him as a prospect? So go ahead.
Yeah. So okay, let's start with what I really think is probably the most glaring, which is his size. Which I think a lot of people are going to hand wave this, and I really don't think you should. I think this is very important to consider. I worry about his size a lot, given where his interior defensive instincts are. So right now, defensively per synergy, opponents are shooting 61.1% around the basket against him, which is really bad. 13th percentile.
And there's multiple reasons why. It's not just like one reason. There's multiple glaring reasons why that is.
So I'm going to start with the most simple of them, which is that he is 6'9", so he does not have great positional size for a center, because he is a center, because he's taken 3 jump shots this entire season. So he kind of has to
jump shots. We got to say that in quotes, bud. Like jump shots. Like,
well, I include in the article a clip of the 3 jump shots, and like some of those aren't jump shots.
You mean the one floaters, is where he's absolutely swatted out of this universe? Like his shot.
Yeah. One of them gets blocked. Like it's not good. So, so he's basically a 5, but if he's a 5, he's 6'9", which is small. And he's also listed on the Marquette website at 215 pounds, which if you look at the average NBA weight by position, that's much closer to the average weight of a starting small forward than a starting center. So if you're talking about other guys that are like 6'9" bigs, you're talking about a guy like Adem Bona, who is much bigger and has a 7'5" wingspan and can jump out of the gym, or a guy like Trace Jackson Davis.
Average size and weight across the league, when I went and I did that query that we talked about last week, was 6'6" to about 215 pounds. That's average. That's across the league. That's not just centers, which I'm sure if you went and actually looked up what those numbers are, he is far off.
Yeah, average center weight in the NBA, according to this article, 247.8 pounds.
Yeah.
So he's given up 33 pounds to your typical NBA center. And then there's like the 6'9" part of it, which is like, so if the guys that are 6'9" that like are center prospects, we'll just start there. So like I talked about Adem Bona, like TJD can like jump out of the gym. Like again, not the longest guy, but super, super athletic.
Legitimate 2-foot leaper. Yep.
Yeah. So then you look at the guys that are like 6'9" that play center minutes in the NBA, and it's like, like the best defenders in the league are like the guys that are 6'9" that play center in the NBA. Like it's a very, very high bar to clear, or they're guys that can shoot the lights out. It's like, all right, well, we might be giving something up, but like we're going to get the shooting on the other end or something like that. Or they're incredibly powerful in the case of like when Draymond Green was smaller and used to play and like played a lot of minutes at the 5. Like it doesn't seem like there's a clear cut, like this is why you can get away with playing him at the 5. And like, it's not like, so, okay. So you might be listening to this and be like, all right, well, what about like Chet Holmgren? Like, why did you give Chet like all those excuses last year? And like, I think he gets moved easier than Chet did. Like guys rise through contact against him a lot. And like guards will like bump into him and like bump him backwards. Interior bigs like get position on him all the time. And like, he can't overcome the seal. He just gets bullied a lot. And like I think a lot of people will use the whole like, oh, like how's this guy gonna stop Jokic or Embiid? And then people will be like, but nobody can stop Jokic and Embiid. And it's like, yeah, but there's a difference between like, are you gonna give them 40 or contain them to 28? And when you're watching Oso Ighodaro and guys like Eric Dixon and Jack Nungy and Ryan Kalkbrenner are just like dominating him in terms of interior positioning. I watched
a play where Kalkbrenner just shoved him out of the way and just threw it down with 2 hands. And I'm like, if Kalkbrenner's doing that, Kalkbrenner, not that he's a standout prospect by any means, but in terms of comparing him to what you would expect from an average NBA center in terms of size and length. Like, that's what Oso Iguodala would have to go up against in the post, like more regularly than not. And if Kalkbrenner's doing that to him, like it's so it's one thing when we talk about defending in the post, Maxwell, and
Mhm.
everyone throws out, well, can he guard Jokic and can he guard Embiid? And then we have to
Yeah.
walk that back and say, well, not everyone's Jokic and Embiid.
Mhm.
But I think
But everybody
almost
is
all
Ryan
of those
Kalkbrenner in
bigs
the NBA.
offensively are Ryan
Like,
Kalkbrenner.
yes, that's like they are all Ryan Kalkbrenner. Like, it is, yeah, it's really concerning to me. And then it's like other big man stuff where like he's Marquette's leading rebounder, but like his rebound rates on that same draft model I mentioned earlier that like love his assist rate, he is like a very bad rebounder using that same method. So it's like, okay, he's 6'9", he doesn't rebound, he gets dominated on the inside by opposing big men. Smaller guys don't really have a problem, like if he's the guy that's helping at the rim. So like his block rate's okay, but it's all like these blocks on guards. Like a lot of it's like on the outside. Like he just doesn't offer any real rim protection. So then it's like you need a very specific fit for him to
Bingo.
work out. And that just gets like you just get into dicey territory, especially with like, I don't know. Like I feel like a lot of times people will be like, oh, this guy would be such a good fit on this team. But the league moves so fast now that it's like, do I really want to draft a guy based on fit, like considering how much player movement happens in the modern NBA? Like, does that even make sense to do? I don't know. Like it's so much easier to just take a guy that's more malleable. So you're basically looking at a guy who you would need to play alongside a shot blocking shooting five. And they're just like, there just aren't a ton of those. And
So
then like
there's
you're
two
still kind of
reasons
giving up size at the 4. Like there's just it requires a really precise fit.
There's
At
two
least
reasons why I wanted to lead the podcast off with Oso Iguodala. Besides Maxwell just doing an outstanding job with the research behind it, and I'm sure I'm going to love his piece on Tuesday on NoCeilingsNBA.com. So I always do with his prospect overviews. But number one, wanted to get myself fired up, ready for the rest of the podcast, talking about a guy who we're struggling with evaluating in a positive light. But number two, I think some of what Maxwell was discussing harkens back to what I wrote about last week in particular, which is when you break out prospects into these buckets that are so specific, right? I will try not to butcher this word on a podcast, but the specificity of a prospect, right? When it moves into that kind of territory, you either have to be freaking special or it's probably not going to work. And more times than not, NBA teams are drafting specific players who fit an overarching theme of where the league is going, right? Like drafting a shooting specialist is much easier to talk yourself into than drafting a player like Oso Iguodala, who, again, if we go back through everything that Maxwell talked about, I get it. He shoots 66% from the field. He's also taking every single one of his shots within 3 feet of the basket. So I would hope,
getting set up by, as we previously mentioned, an all Big East point guard.
Right. So I would hope, given the shot selection, that he would be making at least 66% of his shots for a good college team. He doesn't take any shots outside of the paint. He lacks the requisite size to play the 5 position full time. So we're shoehorning him into this small ball 5 role when he can't space the floor. To Maxwell's point, he is not a legitimate rim protector. I get the block percentage. That statistic is a fraud. It's a point I try and bring up. I at least I have on different podcasts when I talk about different like metrics and numbers.
So elaborate on that a little bit, because I do think it's a really helpful statistic.
No. I'm talking about his block percentage.
Oh, okay, but yeah,
I'm not talking about the indicator.
Okay.
No, steal and block rates are great indicators for NBA level success. Just in general, I don't even think we need to talk about like defense necessarily, like those being strong defensive indicators. Usually steal and block rates and rebounding rates are just strong indicators of this guy's an NBA level athlete. He's going to be able to survive on an NBA floor for a longer career than not. So it's not that I would say that the statistic itself is fraudulent. I'm saying his block rate is fraudulent because the vast majority of his blocks, and I took the time to boot up Synergy and watch every single one of his blocks on the season. The vast majority of them, as you said, Maxwell, are on like these 6'3", 6'4" guards. So like these situations where he has like 5+ inches on these guys, he's clearly longer than them. He doesn't have to get too far up off the ground to swat their shot away. Like those are the types of plays he's making on the ball. He's not acting as a true rim protector. You mentioned him staying in front of guys on the perimeter, using his feet well. I do think he's very aware of his surroundings. I do think he rotates well. I think he sees and processes the game at a high level, which makes sense because of some of the passing flashes that you talked about. The problem is his body does not allow him to react at the speed at which his brain is processing the game. And that's an issue. Like you mentioned how he keeps guys in front of him or how he has that ability. He better keep guys in front of him because when he gets beat off the bounce, he does not recover very well. He does not. It's a lost cause. That's a bucket at the basket. It is what it is. So just given the size limitations, the athletic limitations, the offensive repertoire limitations, and then the defensive shortcomings without even really putting too much stock into the rebounding. Like if you're playing him in a small lineup as the 5-man, that means you better have like at least 3 other plus positional rebounders around him to make up for the fact that he's not 7 foot, 250 pounds, grabbing, almost every rebound in sight with like a 20+% defensive rebounding mark. So it's like, there are just way too many negatives for me to buy in. And the positives you outlined, they make up an interesting prospect in theory. But when you actually look at the tape in practice and you go past some of those statistics, he comes up as a significantly worse Brandon Clark, in my opinion, and a significantly worse, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Trayce Jackson Davis. I would so much rather draft somebody like Trayce Jackson Davis than I would Oso Ighodaro. And I'm not even the biggest Trayce Jackson Davis guy. I think I have Trayce around like the top 45. I think I have him like 46 on my board. There's wiggle room depending on who declares and who doesn't for Trayce to get into the 30s. Like absolutely. But if I don't even think Oso's in the same universe as somebody like a Trayce Jackson Davis, and I know I'm being really strong. I know I'm being really forthcoming with this evaluation, but I just want to hammer home, again, the specific nature of his draft case. I just don't think NBA teams are trending in this type of direction to take this much of a swing on somebody like him. Playing the small ball 5 in the NBA is much easier said than done. We all are guilty of throwing that term around way too often, myself included. I'll raise my hand for that one. It's way harder than just saying so. And just given all the hurdles we laid out for Oso and where the league is going in terms of offensive efficiency from the perimeter, being able to cover ground, being able to guard size in multiple spots, I don't see it. I don't see it with Oso Ighodaro. He will not make the top 60 on my board. And I would be surprised at this point if he had a lengthy runway in the NBA. And that's just my strong opinion. It may be considered a hot take by some. That's just where I sit as a scout and as an evaluator. I needed to get the negative out of the way before we made the vast majority of this podcast much more positive.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's fair. I still think like I can see a team doing it. Like I can see a team talking themselves into like, this guy's got size. He's such a rare passer. The floater touch is good. Maybe he just needs like an elbow jumper to be effective. And then even then, like you can run handoff stuff with him a little bit easier. Everything just opens up a little bit more. I think there's like a real chance for an explosion if he goes back to school and like just works on that. Because I honestly don't think he needs to be like a knockdown 3-point shooter. And the shooting indicators aren't great. Like he's not a good like free throw shooter, even like 61% on free throws over his college career. But I do still think there's reason for optimism. Like this is a rare passer for his size. This is a guy who like was basically a role player a year ago. We've seen a giant leap from him. Maybe there's more in there. But yeah, it's a guy this year, like he's just not a top 60 guy for me at the moment. That could change. Maybe I'll, do more research than I have, watch more film and I'll see something. But I think the fit that's required is very specific. And I don't love the athleticism. I don't love the size. I don't like the rebounding. It's just too much. There's just too much. And like, again, when we're talking about prospects that aren't like guaranteed top 25 guys, you're dealing with significant flaws. Like there are guys that have tons of warts and like they do something well enough that they make it anyway. And that could be the case with Osona's passing. There are just other guys I'd rather bet on at this stage.
And I agree with you about developing not necessarily a 3-point shot, but like an elbow jumper. That'd be great if we at least knew that he was confident enough to attempt them in game. Like we're not even at we were discussing last week about how much of a stretch it is for somebody who's like a 27-28% 3-point shooter in college to raise their shot all the way up to like a league average mark of like 34-35 from the NBA line. And we talked about how much of a stretch that is. So now we're asking somebody to implement something in his game that we have quite literally no evidence that it exists. I get the floater touch. I get that he has a really good hook shot going to his opposite. Like I get these things, but there is zero evidence that a jump shot exists for him. And so I'm not going to bake that into his evaluation of, well, if he had this, then we would be talking about X. I'm considering it a non-factor because to my eyes and to my understanding right now, it's a non-factor. And I think when we get into that territory of projection, right, like projecting something forward that we have zero evidence of, not even like flashes, the waters get really murky really quick to something that I know you've talked about in the past. So we spent a lot of time on Oso Ighodaro. We spent more time than I planned to spend on Oso Ighodaro, but I do think that Maxwell does something unique for us in that number one, he's always in the weeds. He's looking at real sleepers in the draft, very much so like our Nick Hager-Johnson with his sleeper deep dive series. Like Maxwell is always looking for prospects in ridiculous corners of the country as far as Division I schools are concerned. But he's also not afraid to go out and evaluate and talk about guys who don't have the clearest cut path succeeding in the NBA. Maxwell's never been a guy who makes his bones talking about exclusively top 30 prospects on everyone's big board. So that's why when he takes the time to write about a prospect like him, and my opinion is much more divisive than where his might be or where the general public's might be, I want to talk about those things on Draft Deeper because I want our discourse to be different. I don't want our discourse to sound the same as any other draft podcast out there talking about the same guys. So I'm not afraid to bring a strong opinion out every now and then. Again, I'm usually a very positive evaluator. I usually see a lot of different pathways for prospects, and I'm not afraid to go out and state those pathways. This is just one of those really rare instances. I get where everyone's coming from. I just personally don't see it. And if I'm burned, guess what? Every single scout makes mistakes. Every single scout gets things wrong. I will not be afraid to eat crow if Oso Ighodaro in 2 years is as productive of a big as like a Brandon Clark, for example. And that's just my final 2 cents that I'll give on this. So you did write about another out-of-the-box prospect in Jalen Pickett at the guard spot, the Penn State guard. Older prospect, right? Doesn't have as much youth on his side as someone like an Oso Ighodaro, but another one of these guys, Maxwell, who the statistics are really, really interesting, as I know you're going to get into, but the tape itself is also really fascinating, right? Like, I know you're going to talk about how much of his possessions are essentially one way or another factoring in like a post up. He's not the same, though, as one of these like Villanova guards that I just got to watch on Saturday, for example, like a Caleb Daniels or a Justin Moore, somebody like that, who they're trying to post everyone up because they quite literally can't create separation in other ways. I think Jalen Pickett actually knows how to get to his spots much more effectively than guys like that, but he still relies on something that isn't exactly the most common thing for a guard to deploy almost every single trip up with a 27% usage rate in the NBA. So tell us about why Jalen Pickett is such a peculiar prospect.
He's just bizarre. Like he's a post up guard. Like he does so much of his work in the post, and like so on Synergy, I know when I wrote the column, it was around 23% of his possessions were post up. It's still there. And like around 30 or pick and roll, but a lot of the pick and rolls, like I come off the screen, like the guard went under on me, time to post him up. So it's like it's still going to result in the
same thing. That's what I mean.
It's a post up. Yeah, like it's still a friggin' post up. But he is crazy productive and he is super trustworthy, which I talk about all the time. It's just like an underrated asset to consider is like,
Yep.
is a coach going to trust putting this guy in a court? And with Jalen Pickett, like he takes phenomenal care of the ball. Like
He's
he
like consistently a
averages,
near 3-to-1 assist to turnover guy, right?
yes, like every single year. So even back as a freshman at Siena, 6.7 assists to 2.4 turnovers. And now this year as a graduate in the Big Ten, 7 assists per game to 2.1 turnovers. Averages 7.3 rebounds per game. Has a pro body from just like a build standpoint. Like he's kind of slow, which we'll talk about a little bit. That's like a huge downside to him, but really strong, like super strong. So makes a mark on the glass because of that at 6'4", 210. It's like he weighs just about the same as Oso Ighodaro at 6'4". But Jalen Pickett also is, so he spent 3 years at Siena before Penn State, and I think that experience really helped him as a shot maker a lot. Like he is very reliable as far as like, hey, you gotta figure something out and hit one in the mid range, or you've got to just make a tough shot late in the clock. Like he's good at that. So that's something I really enjoy about his game. And he's been just a good 3-point shooter on the year. The volume is kind of low. Like he's only taking 3.4 a game this year. He's at 38.8% this year. Over the course of his college career, he's just under 36%. So it's a little bit scary, but
doesn't he
yeah,
kind of only need I feel like he's the kind of guy who I'm looking at him to shoot a 3 when like they go under on a ball screen, for example,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And that's the thing is he's 34.5% on threes off the dribble. And on catch and shoots, he's 41.8%, which is something he would do a lot more at the next level. Like the one of the big like weird things with projecting Jalen Pickett is like he dribbles the ball the entire shot clock right now. Like he is the Purdue offense. Like the Purdue offense is Jalen Pickett dribbles until Jalen Pickett finds something he likes, whether that's passing it off or shooting it. And he's not like a selfish, like I'm going to rack up assists kind of guy. Like the stats might read that way, but it doesn't feel like that. Like watching the games, like it feels like he's playing to win.
I truly believe he does that though, because they really don't have too many other secondary creators that you
Nobody
want to
can
turn to and
create.
be like, yeah,
Yep.
go make this out of nothing for me. So.
Exactly. Like it's a product of the environment and a product of that is the best way for them to win, rather than like this guy just wants to dribble the ball all the time. So yeah, like he's hyper productive and he does it in weird ways. And like a lot of his threes are like off of him, like setting a screen for somebody else. Like it's weird stuff for a guy who's basically going to be a point guard at the next level. Defensively, I like him as an off-ball defender quite a bit, just because like his understanding of the game is super mature. Like he really knows how to play, as we talked about on offense, and that's there on defense. Like he can telegraph things well. He knows where to be standing. He's engaged. The concern defensively is the speed. He's really slow. He doesn't get up very well to contest. And like some of the clips I post in the article is like him having a hard time getting around screens, being a step slower at the point of attack. And in 2 of those clips, it's against Braden Smith at Purdue, who is not like a guy that everyone is like, oh man, that's an NBA athlete right there. Like Braden Smith, phenomenal college player already as a freshman, but not a guy that people are like, oh yeah, like Braden Smith, NBA dude, NBA athlete. So there's some real just kind of physicality concerns. There's the age concern. He's going to be 24 before the start of the season. There's the fact that his game is so quirky. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a guy who is averaging 18.1 points, 7.3 rebounds, 7 assists, and is 38.8% from 3 and 52.6% from the field. So it's just like, all right, well, like what else can he do? Like what else can he do to make you happy given how much production he's putting in?
You know who he reminds me of? I haven't thrown this comparison at you.
Okay. I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited.
He when I watch him, he seems like a bigger, stockier Jordan McLaughlin. That's the guy who comes to mind when I watched him at USC.
Okay.
Very, very steady operator. Another guy who loved to hang on to the ball, loved to probe, loved to find the right play to make for others. Another guy who, you know, better assist to turnover ratio than not. He was a guy, I believe, in his last college season, 7.8 assists to 2.6 turnovers. So same ballpark, but another one of these really steady operators. The jump shot was never necessarily a strong point for him per se, but about the same mark, 3-point range in his last year at USC compared to what Jalen Pickett's doing right now at Penn State. Not volume, known to be like this deadly outside shooter, but he's held on to backup point guard jobs time and time and time again in the NBA. And he's a smaller version of somebody
But
like
he got a lot
Jalen
of
Pickett.
steals though, like double the steals of Jalen Pickett. And like even though he's smaller,
I'm talking offensively. I wasn't.
Okay,
if you want to throw
yeah.
in some of the defensive stuff, sure. But
Yeah.
like I'm talking offensively as a table setter. Like that's the type of guard that he reminds me of. And those types of guards can stick around in the NBA, even if they're not like 7th, 8th men in your rotation. They can still hang on to roster spots because they're steady, they're reliable, they know how to play the game the right way, and they can man your second unit offense when you need somebody to step up and do so, especially one that's built around heavy pick and roll, where we're playing with a lot of primarily spot up guys in that second unit. So we just need someone who can create shots for others. Jalen Pickett can go do that for you in a pinch. And that's why I think he can absolutely stick around in the league.
Yeah, I think there's a real chance of it. It's just I think the age might scare a team out of drafting him. Like I feel like he's more likely to be an undrafted guy just because that way it's like maybe easier to cut bait if he comes into camp and you're like, you know what, this isn't going to pan out.
Right.
But yeah, at the same time, it's like, the productivity is so ridiculous and he's so trustworthy that it's like, usually like there are guys that I've seen where it's just like, I don't know what this is going to look like in a smaller role. I don't know if they can do it, but because Pickett is so smart and plays exactly the way his team needs him to, it's like, well, if there is a guy that's going to be able to drastically change the role, maybe it's him.
I agree. I agree with you 100%. And that's why I would still, again, I'm not ranking Jalen Pickett inside of a top 60. He could end up there, as you said in your column specifically, as more guys declare, don't declare, he could wind up in a draftable range just by default. But as somebody who you're looking at him as a possible, bring him into camp, maybe toss like an Exhibit 10 at him, eventually get him on a 2-way contract. Like this is the type of guard who you're looking at, somebody with experience. What you're going to get from him. You're not playing any games. So I thought that Jalen Pickett was an interesting discussion point there to bring up. When we come back, we will get into the meat and potatoes of this podcast, which are the top names who I got to see over the last week. Just going to take a quick ad break. Be right back. All right, we are back. So, Maxwell, you ready to dig into some of the guys that I got to see up close and personal?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to hear your impressions because I know there was one that you let out in the group chat, and I was like, oh man, here we go. So I'm really excited to hear it.
Well, I think we're going to lead off with that guy, if I'm correct, and Taylor Hendricks. And it wasn't more so I let it off in the group chat, but I tweeted something and someone's like, oh man,
that's what it was.
Nate's coming in hot. And you texted me on the side. Taylor Hendricks for UCF. I have a column coming out this week, the Morning Dunk, that's dropping same day as this podcast, about some of my top risers on my new edition of my big board that's going to go into the No Ceilings composite big board when we do that pre-tournament update. I moved Taylor Hendricks into the top 10 of my big board. I moved him right into that 10 spot. And that was once territory where, Kevin O'Connor was the main name in the mainstream draft space to really move him there and be like, yeah, he may not have the highest upside as some of these other guys who we could have in this range, but I think his floor, his bet in terms of what his projection looks like in a lower outcome, as opposed to even like a medium or a higher end outcome, we're willing to make that bet on that guy more so than taking swings on some of these other players and prospects that we can in that lottery range. And really, when I saw Taylor, I made that adjustment to my big board before I got to that game on Thursday night. I sat there with our good buddy Corey Tulaba right there at the Temple game. I made that adjustment beforehand, but when I came out of it, he justified that and more. He finished that night with 16 points, 7 rebounds, 2 steals, and a block to really stuff the stat sheet. But Maxwell, it's the simple stuff. He's not trying to do anything fancy, but what he does, he does well. Spot up shooter, turn face, release guy, somebody who he has the ability to cut to the basket. I wish Corey and I would have seen it more. I wish we would see it more on film in general over the course of the college season, but he is a good athlete for his size, 6'9", can certainly dunk the ball home, has the frame that you want to work with up top to fill out and really be one of those potentially bigger 4 men for his size in the NBA, be a strong guy who fills out well. But yeah, the jump shooting, and then what really stood out to me in person, Maxwell, was not necessarily the stuff that he did offensively. It was the defensive stuff. Like, this guy covers so much ground on the court at all times. And when you talk about his role and what it would be at the NBA, you want him to be a 4-man. He's not a guy who I would pigeonhole into this. Yeah, maybe he can play some small ball 5 at different points. I think his base is a little too narrow for that. I don't trust how his lower body's going to fill out for that. And I think when he goes up against some of those bigger centers like we talked about, I don't know if that's the matchup I want him on. I think he's much better playing next to a traditional center, giving him some ability to kind of roam and play different roles defensively, because when he has to break all the way to the opposite end of the court for a closeout on a quarter shot, for example, he can do that for you. Like, there was one play in particular I remember seeing where he had 1 foot outside the paint on like the opposite side, and then he sprinted to the other corner, and he ended up getting like a hand on the freaking 3-point shot, or very close to getting like a hand on the 3-point shot. Like, I'm talking legitimate corner contestant. Like, when you have a big man at his size who can move that well and cover that much ground so quickly, that's the type of player you want defensively on your team. And then, oh, by the way, he offers the very legitimate shooting projection. He's 41.8% from 3 on the year on 4.6 attempts. You echoed very early on at the beginning of the year, towards the beginning of the year. Yeah, Taylor Hendricks, I'm buying the shot. I'm coming all the way in on it. I think it's going to project well at the NBA. Just, again, the defensive playmaking potential, the fact that he doesn't get lost in any one particular area on the court defensively, and then offensively, he has more room to build out his game on the simple play types. And if he ever takes that drastic step forward and improves his handle like he wants to, like Stephen Gillespie got to specifically ask him about in an interview, what do you want to work on at the next level? He called out his dribble. He wants to become a better shot creator, not just a shot maker. If he takes that step forward, then we're not just talking about the 10th best prospect potentially in the draft. We're talking about a guy who could wind up producing top 5, top 6 value. And that's not hyperbole. That's just realistic truth, just given the sample size, the film, and the stats coming all together in one. Maxwell, he's on offense, he's a 90+ percentile total offensive player. On defense, he's a plus 80 total defensive percentile player. Like, this is about as good of a prospect for a freshman as we're going to have in the draft.
Yeah. I feel like I've been, so in my expanding big board this week, I'm not really going to touch it. Like, we're submitting big boards next week. Spoiler alert for consensus big boards. So I'm going to like really sit down after my column this week and then kind of like sift through those rankings. But it just seems more and more like foolish to not be betting on him, because he is like what every NBA team's looking for. Like, he's 6'9", he's long, he covers ground, he can make the simple pass, and he's going to be able to guard the positional spectrum. And I just feel like whenever I start to worry about his game, I feel like I'm picking nits. Like, I feel like I'm being like, oh, but his technique isn't perfect guarding on the perimeter yet. And it's, he's going to figure it out. He's going to figure that out. He's a good athlete. He's exceeded expectations already. The attitude is great by all accounts. Like, it's going to get there. And that's like most guys his size, like, are not well-rounded multi-position defenders coming into the league. They have the tools to do it. It's just a matter of, are they going to, or are they not? But yeah, I love the shot of very early in the year. Like you said, like, I bought it just because it's a gorgeous shot. Like, it is high release. It is pretty. It is balanced. Like, everything about the shot is beautiful. Yeah, the stuff he's going to be able to do defensively as a weak side rim protector. Something I don't think gets mentioned enough with him is this offensive rebounding. Like, that's just a great tool. Like, he is like a weird kind of inside out option because of that offensive rebounding. As he gets stronger, he's going to become a better play finisher too. Like, I just think he's well-rounded. He's giant. He looks every bit of 6'9". Like, there are a lot of guys that we've talked about in the No Ceilings group chat before being like, how tall do we actually think this guy is? Taylor Hendricks is not one of those guys. That dude is 6'9". Yeah, lights out shooter, 40+% shooter, great defensive instincts, already productive defender with room to grow on that end of the floor. It's like, the more you just explain the basic parts of his game, it kind of feels like, hey, don't overthink it. That's a guy you take in the top 10.
You talked about, picking nits as far as like some of his perimeter technique. To me, one of the better indicators as far as a big man coming out on the perimeter and defending in space against quicker guards would be in pick and roll defense, right? When you're playing a switch heavy scheme, he gets onto that ball handler what is that pick and roll ball handler doing against him offensively? Well, in those coverages, he's defended 9 of those shots from the pick and roll ball handler, and they've made 2 out of 9 against him. So 22% shooting against him in those situations. He's actually been a better post-up defender than would indicate. So maybe if his body does continue to fill out, maybe if I'm wrong about the narrower base, and he just completely gets tree trunk legs out of nowhere and he can hold his own against the 7-footers in the NBA, then maybe he's going to be a good post-up defender as well. But there isn't really one defensive metric I can point to other than the rebounding percentage where he rates out low. And the rebounding, I think that's the other thing I come back to, Maxwell. We talked about it with Oso Ighodaro, right? Those small ball 5 lineups where if you're going to be the primary rebounder at that position on the floor, then he probably needs to play with 2 or 3 other plus positional rebounders to be able to really bring
the
that
defensive
full
rebounding
circle.
isn't anything special.
It's not great, but at the same time, just given all the other value he presents in other areas of the floor, I think we're willing to live with something like that, especially if he's playing the 4-man much more exclusively next to a 5. So I guess the biggest question I can ask about you, about Taylor Hendricks to you, do you think the shot creation is going to come along? Do you think there's actually a realistic outcome where he reaches that level of production and he can crack through and be, a secondary or tertiary shot creator as opposed to just more like a spot up guy, play finisher?
That's a really good question.
It's a loaded question. I know.
Yeah, it is. I think it's possible. I know that's like a cop-out answer, but I trust his instincts, and I think he's already gotten better at like putting it on the floor. And like I've always noted, like does a decent job of like playing low with his dribble at the very least. I wonder if. Do you think like a Jeremy Grant level creator is like a reasonable outcome?
I think that would be a higher level outcome because Jeremy Grant is really good at getting downhill, getting to the rim, right?
And then he can also
get to the
stronger too. I feel like Jeremy plays stronger.
I don't think Taylor Hendricks is ever going to be this really awesome, like I'm going to get all the way to the basket from the top of the key kind of guy. But
especially like on an island, like I think it's more like when defenses are tilted and rotating, can he catch it and decide that it looks better to drive to the basket versus like just shoot it? And I think that's a possibility. Like I don't know. I think the handle is like functional enough that if he's like your 4th best player, it's fine. But I think if you're talking about him being like a top 3 option, then I think he has to hit that higher end outcome.
Well, because that to me, if he was able to hit that higher end outcome, that would justify him going higher than like anywhere from like 10 to 15 in the draft. Like if you're taking Taylor Hendricks in my mind above like the 10th spot, for example, then you must really think something like that is in his future.
So do you, if you have him top 10? Or is that more just a product of you being lower on this draft?
That's more so if I were drafting him above that 10 to 15 range. Like I think 10 to 15 is a pretty reasonable spot for him at this point. But like let's say a team's sitting at like the 7th spot and they don't value too many other options that are on the draft board, and they look at Taylor Hendricks. Like I'll give a little bit of a spoiler. I'm going to be a guest on a Pacers podcast on Monday night. I will let you guess as to which podcast that is, but we're going to talk about potential options for the Pacers with their lottery pick. And right now they're sitting at 7th in the standings. I look at Taylor Hendricks as someone who could possibly fit that team pretty well, just given some of the needs that they have, but is taking somebody like him at 7 too rich for your blood. And for me, I think that answer would ultimately be yes, and that he certainly wouldn't be my first choice that high of a spot, because I don't think he's going to be like a Jeremy Grant level creator in terms of being able to get all the way to the basket in like an isolation setting. I think I want Taylor Hendricks to be focused on being able to bust out like a really quick dribble move off a jab step and then being able to step back, hit a jump shot, like around the elbow or like something along those lines. I want him to be comfortable creating a shot some type of jump shot off the bounce, which he's shown in minor flashes at UCF. He has the ability to do that. I'm not as concerned about him turning, facing, getting all the way to the basket. I would love it if.
So you're talking more like 1 dribble, 2 dribble pull up than like
exactly.
He's attacking and getting downhill and finding the open man while he's doing it.
Right, because you can divert and split off shot creation in multiple different avenues. I don't think that path is going to be there for him, but I do think the 1-2 dribble pull up off like a jab step, quick dribble move, step back. Like I think that stuff is in his future. And if it is, then again, I become much more inclined to think about him possibly a little bit higher than the 10th spot. But even if he's just the spot up threat that he is right now, somebody who gets more active cutting to the basket off the ball, maybe you start involving him in a little bit of action in the post, maybe you utilize him around the elbows. That's what he is. I still think I'm taking him inside the top 10. And maybe it is a product of some of the other options we have in this draft class. Maybe I'm just not as sold as some of these other guys in the late lottery range. I'd much rather just take somebody like Taylor Hendricks at this point. Like where is he on your board right now? I know it's not your final update.
Yeah,
but.
So he was 13 on my board last week.
Okay. That's where he was for me too, before I moved him up.
Which like, yeah, I think I could realistically see him as high as 9, honestly, on my board. Like this is going to upset people, but like I could see him above like, so the people I have right in front of him are Cason Wallace, Grady Dick, Nick Smith Jr., Keontae George. And like, I think I might like, on a given day, I might like him better than all of those guys, which is so maybe a little controversial, but I don't know. I could talk myself into it.
So my 11 to 16 range after Taylor Hendricks, I have Keontae George, Cason Wallace, Bryce Sensabaugh, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Anthony Black, Nick Smith. That's my 10 to 16 right now. I think I'd probably rather draft Taylor Hendricks at that 10 spot than talk myself into taking one of those other guys that high. Because we talked about it last week with some of these outcomes.
He feels safe. Like that's the other thing too, is like he's just giant and he can shoot and he knows how to play defense. So
yeah, when are those things not working out in the NBA?
I don't know. Like the worst version of Taylor Hendricks still seems like a guy that's like on NBA teams. Right? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. Like the worst
and that's what teams should be doing.
Better than Derek Jones.
They should be taking those guys that we think are going beyond NBA rosters at the bare minimum for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Not these guys who have outcomes where you can talk yourself into, could he be out of the league in like 3 to 4 years, right? Like Keontae George and Nick Smith and Anthony Black do not have as safe a pathways, I think, as people think they do. Bryce Sensabaugh, we've nitpicked him enough, as good as he's been on offense. We've nitpicked him enough about the defense and some of the other flaws.
I like Bryce.
I love him too. Cason Wallace has every single skill I want from a guard in the book, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to all come together for him more often than not. So if he's inconsistent, Jekyll and Hyde type of guard in the NBA, and do I want to value that guy more than somebody like Taylor Hendricks? And then Jalen Hood-Schifino had another great game today against Michigan. And like when it all comes together for him and he's having
his
one
good
of his
games
best games,
great.
Maxwell, he has the best hot streaks of like any other player I think I've evaluated in this class who isn't named Victor and Scoot. And I'm saying he's had some games where I come away more impressed than like some of Brandon Miller's like best hot streak games. Like he is freaking awesome when it's on, but when he's off, man, it looks bad when he's off and when he's turning the ball over constantly in traffic and like all that type of stuff. So like just given those flaws that I outlined for those prospects, how many of those flaws am I whipping out for Taylor Hendricks? He's probably the poorest dribbler of the names we're talking about in that top 16 range. Yeah. But how much do we really want him handling the ball, right? He's probably one of the poorer passers in that range that we're talking about. How often do we need him to create looks for others? You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I think like the concern would be like, okay, well then what if I'm in a playoff series? The other team is just like running him off the line. Then what? Like, but does that even happen? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't know.
Is he not going to be able to shoot over the top? He has a pretty high release.
That's the thing. Yeah. So it's like, and is that like really going to be the thing? Like if even like where we're projecting him as people that really like him, it's still like, well, is that going to be the game plan to like like if he's just getting smothered on the perimeter, it's like, well, then he's still creating a ton of space. Like,
all right, here's my very quick counter to the Well, in this specific scenario, is he getting played off the floor in a playoff series? If
Not
he's
defensively, yeah.
if he's playing that many minutes for a team that went to the playoffs, that probably means
Mhm.
he's been a pretty damn good player throughout the season, or a good contributor
Yeah,
on like a
yeah.
great team. So like if that's really the nit we're going to pick with him in that kind
Mhm.
of scenario, I think that argument kind of sees itself out to a certain
Yeah,
extent in
for sure.
relation to some of the other players we're looking at in a draft class in a similar
Mhm.
range. So those are my thoughts on Taylor Hendricks. He's a player who's really grown on me. There's not much we're necessarily adding to the conversation in relation to him, but it was more so confirming my positive thoughts on him, seeing him in person. And like, yeah, the athleticism, the size, both of those boxes clearly check out. The shooting clearly checks out. The defensive mobility, the ground coverage, the playmaking, they all check out. So what am I really leaving behind with Taylor Hendricks at this point? He is a top 10 guy for me. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more conversation about him in the coming months and where he sits on other people's draft boards. I'm curious to see where he does end up on our no ceilings composite big board update. I'm very curious to see where he rates out.
Yeah,
So,
he's like one of the guys I'm kind of like, where is everybody on this guy? What's the temperature here? That should be an interesting one. And the next guy is one of those people too.
yeah, we're going to take one more quick ad break. When we come back, we are going to discuss two names that I got to see Saturday night in particular who, again, these guys are growing on me. They're rising up plenty of big boards fast. Stay tuned. You'll find out who those guys are. All right, we are back off our last break in this podcast. So I got to see Villanova and UConn in person Saturday night. I really wanted to see Cam Whitmore in person. So Cam Whitmore was a prospect, Maxwell, who I was really, really, really high on him. Like at this point last season, when we're getting into like McDonald's All-American game season and like Jordan Brand Classic, like all like the exhibition events for high schoolers, I'm tweeting out every chance I get, like, pay attention to Cam Whitmore. This guy's been undervalued in terms of where I feel he should have been from a recruiting ranking standpoint. I think he's going to blow up to Villanova. He could be a big time NBA prospect. Get an eye on him. He every exhibition he played in, he knocked him out of the park. He was a standout prospect to the point where he rose up to like the top 5 range on people's preseason draft boards. And I think he ended up either 5 or 6. If I don't quote me on that, I think it was around 5 or 6 for us. No ceilings, our first composite big board update on the year. So he's been in a very high conversation, and something I talk about in my piece, as well as I've talked about in other risers and fallers conversations. Any sort of movement in the lottery, if you're moving a few spots, I do equate that to the same as if you're outside like the top 20 guys or so, and I'm moving you like 10 or so spots up and down a big board. That's the same level of movement, because when you get up to the lottery, there's only so many names that we're talking about, right? So any type of movement can potentially be drastic. So Cam Whitmore was hurt to start the year, right? Had the thumb injury, came back, wasn't fully himself, wasn't shooting the ball up to the expectation that we thought he should be, was very clumsy and like falling all over the place for something we talked about. It's like he was
very weird.
prospect.
And then someone too was like, yeah, look at this high school scouting report I did on him. And they're like, yeah, he falls down all the time. Yeah, it seems like that's been a little better lately though.
So I was just gonna say, so he was like a very bizarre prospect to watch for like a month and a half, and then something just seemed to click for him, man. And he has been so much better, especially in the month of February. He's shooting the ball much better. He's been a more consistent finisher at the basket. He's getting to the line. He's defending multiple positions. The defense again. This is really another reason why I love to see players in person. It's number one, I want to see how big they are. I want to see how athletic they are, how quick they are, how they're processing the game, how when I'm watching their eye movements on the court, I want to watch how they're interacting with guys. Like, these are all fun things that I really like to take note of in person. But I also like to see how guys flow within a defensive scheme. Are they communicating with one another? How many positions can they actually guard? What does it look like they're going to be able to do at the NBA level? I'm able to evaluate those things a lot better in person. This is just me than I am sometimes on the tape. And when I saw Cam Whitmore defensively the other night, man, holy cow. This guy, I have strong confidence when he's locked in, when he continues to improve and is more fully aware of everything that's going on around him. I think he's going to be able to guard 1 through 4. in the NBA.
Really? Okay.
I truly believe that. I think he is that quick. I think the feet are that good. I think he's long enough. I think he's competitive enough. And if he has to guard other backcourt players, he's going to body them up and possibly bully them and take their lunch money. Like, he is a monstrously big wing. Yeah, I would categorize him more as like a forward. Like, if I'm looking at him, if you see him in person, you might
He's a
think
3-4.
that, like, is he going to be a power forward in the NBA? Like,
Mhm.
but he has the perimeter skill offensively to be a 3 long term, which is nuts. He has the ball skill. He has the footwork. He has that first step explosion. He has the leaping ability. He has the perimeter shot making potential, not just making open spot up threes, but he's another one of these guys who he makes some tweaks to his handle, and you could see him all of a sudden creating some of the shots in the mid range like he certainly showed he could on the high school tape. He's proven to me he can hit 3-point shots at a good enough level to come into the league. He may not be an above average shooter the minute he steps foot in the NBA, but I think within 2 to 3 years, he will be at that league average mark. I'm very confident in his ability to finish around the basket. He's not going to get pushed off his spots. He will finish through contact. You could talk me into him being a 2-level scorer right now, Maxwell, and I do think eventually that 3rd level has a pretty decent chance of getting there. So this is just one of those things. Really athletic forward, plenty of positional size, 3-level scoring potential, multi-positional defensive potential. If you're not ranking him inside of your top 5, Maxwell, are you overthinking it?
That's a good question. So he is 5 for me, and he is in danger of being passed.
Oh boy.
I changed my mind about the Thompson twins like 8 times a week. Like, I still need to deep dive on them, because it's hard, because like when I make my film schedule for the week, a lot of the times I'm just looking at like who's playing each other in college. And, like, the Thompsons don't play other pro prospects. So it can be really difficult to get them on the schedule. So that is like first order of business as soon as the tournament is over.
I do need to watch those 2 playoff games that just happened between the Reapers and the Dreamers.
They weren't available for me to watch yet this morning, so I haven't seen them yet. But the last playoff games, they looked phenomenal, both of them. And then
Asar's been freaking
Asar's
awesome.
been hitting threes again. He's been hitting free throws, and then Amen hit a 3 where he didn't do the weird wrist thing at the top, and like that in and of itself, I was like, I'm about to overreact to this and make this man number 4 on my board.
Overreaction Monday, as they do on the Rich Eisen show.
exactly. So I need to just kind of dig in and like go to town on their like full season of film and to see where do they start, where do they end, what do I like. But so here's my big question with Cam Whitmore, because we're talking like overthinking it, and I am very scared about a certain element of his game. And it was a part of his game that I liked quite a bit, especially in like the All-Star exhibition game, like circuit film, was like, it felt like in high school, Cam did a very good job of like recognizing when help defense was coming and just making the very easy dish off pass. And I know this Villanova team is a mess, but his assist
I will argue against that point, but I'll let you finish where you're going.
So I'm just going to lay it out real quick. So his assist percentage is very low. Like I mentioned my database earlier, the only guy he's ahead of on there right now is Anthony Gill. That's it. That's the only guy in that database that he has a better assist percentage than. He still turns it over quite a bit. He can get really forceful with his passes. The handle can come a little loose. Like I see the vision for Cam Whitmore. I'm with you. I think the defense is like better than it's been. I think the like shot blocking has been sort of muted because of the injury and things like that. And I think that could like really come around at the next level. Love the frame, love the body, love that he's a 38% catch and shoot guy. And I think just the simplified nature of like, he's going to defend, he's going to hit threes off the catch, he's going to drive to the basket with ferocity and a gigantic frame, and dudes are going to bounce off of him. Like, I like all that. Like, I think that's all good. Where I have a harder time like taking him super high is just like, is that passing field there at all? And
my counter to that is,
so you just saw him in person. I want to hear where you're at.
So he absolutely needs work in terms of reading not just multiple levels of the defense, but the level that's in front of him, being better aware of his surroundings and making the right read off of those very basic play types and decisions. He does still need to improve. I will give you that. But the other thing I want you to keep in mind is that Villanova offense is fucking horrendous. There is no other way around that. Like, if people want to say that Penn State could be a little boring to watch for the reason that we talked about, Jalen Pickett holds onto the ball. They don't really have any other creators, but it's like him dribbling the air out of the ball. I think Jalen Pickett is a much more effective operator than any of the guards that Villanova has. And those guys literally dribble the air out of the ball for 30 seconds on the shot clock, to where Cam Whitmore, and I noticed this in some other tape that I watched, but really I'm talking about a lot of what I saw in person. The opportunities he got, Maxwell, he did not really have too much time to do much of anything with. He didn't have the time available to him in those possessions to make the types of reads that you want to see him make on an NBA floor. He didn't have time to freaking experiment, to take two dribbles and figure out where should he go with the ball next. It's like as soon as he catches it, there's only so much time left. He kind of either has to jack up a shot or he needs to get on his high horse, use that explosive first step, and he has no other option but to get all the way to the basket and get a shot up. So I think if he had a little more room to experiment, I wouldn't say there would be a drastic shift in those passing numbers. I think we'd have better flashes on tape. Like when you talk about somebody like, I'm not comparing them directly, but like when people have had qualms about Nick Smith's passing, for example, but even though he's not averaging the most assists per game out of some guards in the country, like there are some real flashes you can point to on tape. Be like, yeah, that's an awesome like live dribble pass. Like I buy that will work. Cam Whitmore hasn't had any real opportunities like that. He only takes less than 10 shots per game, yet he's clearly the most talented player they have on that roster by a country mile. So for all the arguments you want to put out there about potentially low feel on both ends of the floor to certain degrees, I would argue he hasn't been put in a role to where he can properly explore the studio space and we can have a definitive answer on what he can do and just shutting the book on what he can't do. That's my argument.
All right. I think that's all fair. I don't know. I'm just a little worried because it seems like it's just so far behind.
If that's the differentiator for you between like rating him on a big board between him and like the Thompson twins, yeah, he's just not a men in a SAR from that perspective. And I don't think he's ever going.
I think he's a much better shooter, and I think he's much more physically developed than both of them.
Bingo.
And I think that matters substantially. But
bingo. So I think more of that can come along developmentally. I think he can get better at that as he gets a little bit more of an expanded offensive role in the NBA, but it's not there. It's probably not going to be there to their level. So yeah, if that's a differentiator, not just for you, Maxwell, but for any scouts out there, if that's a really big differentiator for you, or you're an NBA team that believes in having a high assist rate across the board, like you want a bunch of guys who can move the ball effectively at all times. If you're the Oklahoma City Thunder, you're probably not the most enthused by everything you've seen from Cam Whitmore offensively from that perspective. If you're the Indiana Pacers, you might not be jumping the gun as much as I feel they should be at taking a guy like Cam Whitmore, because that's another team with a really high assist rate across the board. They want guys who can just zoom that ball all the way across the court until they find the right three-point shot, and they're going to take it. They play at a really high pace. So Cam Whitmore, for all that he can do individually from a transition perspective, he's also not fitting into a culture in that regard, at least not right out of the box. So it can be something that knocks him down a few pegs on the board. But even Maxwell, even if you put those other two guys ahead of him, let's say you're big board, you got Victor Scoot, you got Brandon Miller, Jarris Walker, and the Thompson twins in some order, and you're looking for the next guy up, then at that point, I really don't think it's much of an argument. I think you have to have Cam Whitmore at 7, at least from a lot of what I've seen. Is that kind of where you're going to settle?
That's my exact top 7.
Okay.
Top 4 spot on, and then like Thompson's and Cam is like where it gets shaky. And I think the Thompsons might possibly they have a way to surpass Jarris depending on how I come out of the film. But
I would agree with that. I had a SAR as high as 3 on my board already.
He was 3 for me for a long time, and then the shot fell off and like the finishing started to really scare me. And
then Brandon Miller just started to make almost everything he looked at in more games than not, and the playmaking feel started to come alive, and he started to be a better defender multi-positionally. And then Jarris is just a monster human being, and there's not really much I don't trust Jarris to do on a basketball court, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I think that's more so the reason why I have him so high on my board. I'm not saying he's a superstar across the board, but there's very little that I don't trust him to do to at least a bare minimum certain degree. And I think that's a separator for him amongst some of those other prospects. The Thompson twins, they have all the gifts in the world. They are truly, borderline generational athletes. Are they going to put enough of their games together and to really mesh at the NBA level? Maybe we're all overthinking it. Maybe they should be like top 5 pretty definitively. Maybe they should be 3 and 4. I don't know. I'm just kind of giving a sort of where I'm at and indicators that I buy into: positional size, athleticism, strength, coordination, shooting ability. I'm seeing all of it from Cam Whitmore, and it's hard to talk myself out of him at this point. So as of right now, I have him 5th on my board as well. The last guy I got to see, we won't spend too much time on him, but Jordan Hawkins for UConn doesn't really break out of the box offensively other than the shooting. I mean, the shooting, obviously.
He does break out of the box pretty big as a shooter. So it's not the end of the world for Jordan Hawkins by any means.
No, he's still taking around 7 attempts from 3 per game. He's still making 38% of them. Like he is a ridiculous volume shooter. Like you watch him warm up, Maxwell, crazy. His shot is effortless. It's amazing. I love watching him shoot. I came into the year not being as high on him and rating him inside my top 25, which I do have him at 25 now, because the 2-point percentage, which it's still kind of down for a guard, but that scared me. It's like, if he's only shooting the basketball and that's all he's doing, he better be doing it at a freaking spectacular clip. And he has been all year long. And then you throw in some of the fun effort flashes that I got to see in the Villanova game, like going up for offensive rebounds, going after it on the defensive end as far as playing passing lanes, double teaming at the right times, rotating at the right times. And then when he does have a lane in the basket, he can get a step on you. Like you won't expect it, but he'll get a step on you. He'll take that lane and all of a sudden he'll be at the basket throwing it down. So like he's an underrated athlete too, which I think multiple people here on No Ceilings talked about.
So yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, because I was talking to Bryce Simon, a friend of the program, about
shout out
about
Bryce.
Jordan Hawkins. Yeah, he does great work. And I laid out some of my concerns to him. One of the things I mentioned was the athleticism. And he was like, "Go watch the Seton Hall game." And in the Seton Hall game, I think he had a couple dunks. He was really getting it moving. He was passing it, and it was one of those games where it's man, am I blowing some of this stuff out of proportion as far as what I have concerns about. But yeah, I think he's one of those guys where he's so truly special as a movement shooter that it's this guy's going to be around. Think about how many, okay, so again, we're going to play the worst case scenario game. Think about how many opportunities Matt Thomas has gotten to be an NBA player. And think about how much better Jordan Hawkins is than Matt Thomas. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's just I don't know, hard not to draft a guy in the first round when you think they're going to be around for a really long time. And he's also just a total dog defensively.
He is.
He just absolutely gets after it on that end and gets up in guys' faces, dives on the floor for loose balls. His work rate is absurd. He's one of the highest work rate players in the country, as far as he is all over the place on defense without doing anything, totally playing within himself. Doesn't gamble, doesn't do dumb stuff ever. And then on offense, he's running off screens the whole game.
I was gonna say he's one of those guys who's in great shape. If you're telling me he's gonna get close to the amount of miles that JJ Redick has ran in his career, that wouldn't shock me. He is in great shape for a guard.
Yeah, so I think there's a career for him. Even if it doesn't go well. I do think the higher end outcomes can be a little scary, just because, again, kind of a lower assist percentage guys. But again, if using my same model, a lot of guys that profile in that same range were guys like Malik Beasley, were guys like Gary Trent, guys like Duncan Robinson, where it's those are knockdown shooters who just run off screens and take a lot of threes and hit them.
He's been starting to figure it out though a little bit in some DHO and pick and roll sets, which is fascinating.
Yes.
Not as a playmaker, but as a shooter scorer. He's been starting to figure it out a little bit.
Yeah, so that's I guess I'm most interested is that, so everyone knew he was a good shooter before. And it was one of those things where he shot okay as a freshman, but the people that were really bought into him coming into this season are the people that were he's going to be an absurd knockdown shooter. And he was. So it's okay, you made that sort of leap just from getting used to the speed of the game. What does that mean for your playmaking? And where is your playmaking headed, because we're still looking at a guy who's like not a high assist guy, like pretty even assist turnover guy, doesn't have a ton of juice, chased off the line, not consistently a great finisher, like at the rim. Like you mentioned that he has moments where like he's clearly a better athlete than you'd expect, but on the year in the half court, he's 48.1% at the rim. He doesn't always get his like body mechanics right and his steps correct. So like a lot of times he does come out flat when he goes to jump at the rim and doesn't get off the floor that well on the go. So it's just like, is that workable? Like, how do we improve that? I don't know. Like, and is he going to need it, or is he just going to provide so much space running around on the perimeter that it doesn't really matter?
Well, I just kind of wonder how many times in his career has he genuinely been asked to be like, yeah, go be a table setter, go out there and make others better, versus like, yeah, we know you're the best shooter on the team, go out there and get us buckets, give us instant offense. Like, I just wonder how many times he's honestly been asked to do that in his career. And that's one of those things where, yeah, if he doesn't have experience doing it, then we can't expect him to come up at high major basketball in the Big East and be like, yeah, I'm gonna dissect all of these different passing lanes and I'm gonna find the open man. Like, if that vision hasn't been baked into him at a younger age, then, you know, that's one thing. I haven't watched a lot of his high school tape, to be perfectly honest. Like, I haven't gone back and studied somebody like a Jordan Hawkins and watched how he played in AAU and played in high school. Like, that's an exercise for some of these lower assist rate guards. Maxwell, I think maybe that's something that you and I go and do this draft cycle. Maybe that's an interesting exercise for us to figure out, well, if they've never really been asked to do it, how can we expect them to all of a sudden turn around and show us all these amazing flashes? So that's kind of where I'm at on that front. But to your point, yeah, the shooting, the nuclear shooting, the movement shooting, you know, off screens, 86 percentile, spot up, 96 percentile. Yeah, miscellaneous plays, 97 percentile. So really, like, when the offense breaks down, they don't even know how to categorize it properly. Like, yeah, he can make something out of nothing with a jump shot. And it's led me to compare him, and I whipped this out to you in a chat, like a bigger Isaiah Joe. Like that's the type of comparison that I come up for him. And like Isaiah Joe, I had him 30th on my board in the 2020 draft. Like literally the same range, like 25.
Mason Jones is still going to make it, by the way. Both of those guys were the two guys I was like really, really high on in that draft.
A Maxwell deep cut really Mason Jones shot out. You love to see that on Draft Jones. Deeper. Am I off base with that comparison? Do you think that's pretty spot on?
I think that's plausible. Like I think that's like a very real path for him. It's just like a guy who takes a ton of threes and hits a lot of them and can get to threes in a number of ways. Like, he's not the guy who's parked. Like, he's not just a guy who stands there and catches. Like, they have actions that they can run to set up for him to get those looks. They can use him as a screener. They can just like do different kind of funky stuff to get him looks and know that he doesn't need a lot of time. He doesn't need a lot of balance. He can get it off and he can hit.
Well, Oklahoma City fans should be indebted to the 76ers to a degree, because Philadelphia just tossed them into the bargain bin. And it was like, oh, look, Oklahoma City just walked into the lost and found and found Isaiah Joe is now shooting 45% from three for a Thunder team that has made some noise in recent weeks as a team who, yeah, they're probably not like getting into the playoffs, but at the same time, they're not a bad team either. They are consistently competitive every single night. And Isaiah Joe is like the perfect offensive injection for them, like exactly what they needed. They needed a more consistent spot up shooter on the wing. They got him in Isaiah Joe. Why can't Jordan Hawkins be that same sort of injection for a different NBA team, whoever would like to draft him? So yeah, like I have him at 25 on my board. Where do you have him on your board, Maxwell?
He was right around that same range. So I haven't done a lot of tinkering. I've been trying to like tinker less to just like think about players conceptually more. It's been like my biggest change that I've made this year, so that like when I go into making the board, I'm doing it with more clarity and a more sort of thoughtful understanding, rather than like, I have this guy here, I have that guy there. He was, I want to say 21st the last time I made a board. So that
means that like conceptually
a first round guy.
Yeah, like archetype wise, Hawkins is exactly who you want to look for in like a potential top 20 prospect. So that bodes well either way.
Yep. Yeah, that's the range I have him in. And like, he can only fall so far for me, is a thing where it's like, I don't know, like what, like even like a month ago, it was like, what could he really do that would make me be like, actually, he can't shoot. You know what I mean? Like, the stuff that he does well it's just good enough that he's gonna be around for a long time.
You and I've gone back and forth. Like that 26 to 40 range for me is like such like a dumpster fire in terms of what decisions I actually want to make ranking players. So Jordan Hawkins I feel very good about where he's at and where he's trending towards as far as when he gets up to the NBA. So that's why he has averted that dumpster fire, and he sits at 25 on my board currently, jumping up 10 spots after sitting at 35. So those were some of the guys who I got to see in person this week. A lot of really good, fun names where I didn't expect us to be bringing all of these really home run points to the table for these guys, like information that no one's heard before on any other podcasts or written mediums. But at the same time, having your evaluations validated in person is a very meaningful thing, or meaningful goal to be able to achieve when you can do it. So anyone out there, if you have the chance to get to a conference tournament or see any of these guys in the NCAA tournament, go do so. Go do so. You'll thank yourself later. Trust me, it's worth it. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Draft Deeper podcast. Thank you all so much again for listening and tuning in. Maxwell, I know that we talked about who you're writing for on Tuesday. We did the Oso Ighodaro piece, and any other potential sneak previews or things that you're toying around working with.
So I just want to say my column this upcoming week has a ton of guys in it. So like,
oh boy,
enjoy, because there are a lot of guys that like aren't getting a lot of love. We got some Bilal Coulibaly. We got some Michael Casiedo.
Yes.
We got some Drew Pember. We got some Jalen Slauson. We got some Dalton Connect in there. We're hitting on guys that people aren't hitting on, and I'm really excited about it. Dalton Connect, Northern Colorado, maybe a guy. Take a look at the film. They're not playing anymore because they were like 10-21 this season, and I swear to God, it's not his fault. He's interesting. I swear to God, he's interesting. So take a look into Dalton Connect. But yeah, Drew Pember, like I'm very interested in at the moment. Like that's a guy I've been thinking about a lot. Jacob Toppin. I'm hitting some guys that like could be dudes that are not being talked about at all.
That's Maxwell's specialty at the prospect overview. So make sure you're locking in for his piece Tuesday on NoCeilingsNBA.com. Make sure you're reading my column coming out on Monday, the morning dunk. We're going over my top risers for my newest edition of my big board. And certainly make sure you're checking out all of the other great content on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed, as well as our website. We got plenty more in the works. It's conference tournament time. It's NCAA tournament time. It's draft season. It's in full swing. I can't wait to continue diving into some more topics with the audience in the weeks to come. But until we meet again on this podcast feed, you can follow myself on Twitter at Draft Deeper, follow Maxwell on Twitter at Boundboards, and of course, follow No Ceilings NBA to stay up to date on when we're dropping our next podcast episode and our next written works. But until then, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.